The first time I realized my husband had been taking money from me, he looked me straight in the eye and told me I was imagining things, like I was losing track of my own account. But the numbers kept shifting, small amounts at first, then patterns I could not ignore. Money moving quietly into places I had never seen. And when I finally traced where it was going, it was bigger than just us. Accounts tied to contracts, names I did not recognize, the kind of movement that does not stay private for long. So I stopped asking questions and started documenting everything, because this was not just betrayal anymore. This was the beginning of something federal. And months later, at 6:12 in the morning, I watched from the window as agents walked up to the same door he used to leave through like nothing was wrong. By then, my revenge was already done. I did not need to say a word, because everything he built on lies was collapsing in front of him. And when it was over, he was not just exposed, he was facing charges that would take years of his life. My name is Rachel Carter, and this is how I turned his secrets into my revenge. Chapter 1. The first time I realized my husband had already made decisions about my house without me, I was standing on the stairs listening to him lie. I was not supposed to be home yet. My afternoon client canceled, and I drove back thinking about dinner, not about anything that would shift something deeper, something permanent. Then I heard Sandra's voice. She won't say no. Marcus answered too quickly, like he had already rehearsed it. She doesn't need to know everything right away. I stopped halfway down the stairs, my hand tightening around the railing. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. They had already talked about this, not once, more than once. By the time I stepped into the kitchen, both of them had already rearranged their faces into something neutral, something harmless. Marcus looked up first and smiled. "You're back early." Sandra turned slower, her eyes moving past me instead of to me, scanning the room like she was measuring space that didn't belong to her. "Marcus told me I could stay in the guest room for a while," she said. Not a question, not a request, a statement. I set my keys down carefully, quieter than usual, like I didn't want to interrupt something that had already been decided. "For how long?" "Until things settle," Marcus said. Settle. It sounded temporary. It felt like something already permanent. I nodded once, but I didn't agree. I was watching. I bought this house in 2011, years before Marcus entered my life, back when my design work barely covered my expenses and every project felt like a risk. I stayed up late sketching layouts, sourcing materials, trying to prove I could build something stable out of nothing. Every inch of this place came from that effort. When we got married in 2013, I kept the house in my name. My mother insisted. "Protect what you build," she told me. Back then, I thought she was being overly cautious. Now, standing in my own kitchen while another woman looked at my space like she was already part of it, I understood something I hadn't before. It wasn't caution, it was preparation. Sandra moved past me without asking, her fingers brushing against the back of a chair like she was testing the quality. "This place has potential," she said. "Not beautiful, not comfortable. Potential." I followed her down the hallway, slower this time. She stepped into the guest room and turned once, taking everything in like she was already adjusting it in her mind. "This is nice." Then she walked straight to the closet. She didn't pause, she didn't ask. She reached for the handle and pulled it open. Where would I keep my things? I felt it again, that shift. Not anger, not yet. Recognition. No one opens a closet in a house I paid for and talks about where they belong unless they already believe that decision has been made. Marcus leaned against the doorframe behind her, relaxed. "We can clear out some space," he said. Clear out, like it was already happening. I didn't respond. I stepped back into the hallway and let them stay there, talking about adjustments, about space, about things that belonged to me like I wasn't even part of the conversation. That night, after Sandra left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt altered. Marcus sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone like nothing had changed. "Did you already talk to her about staying here?" I asked. He didn't look up immediately. "I mentioned it." Mentioned. I let that word sit there for a second. Mentioned or decided. He sighed, irritation slipping through. You're reading too much into this, Althea. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked at him long enough to see something clearly. He wasn't unsure. He wasn't asking. He had already chosen, and I wasn't part of that decision. I nodded slowly, like I accepted it, but I didn't. I didn't react. I started paying attention. Later, when he went upstairs, I walked through the house alone. The living room looked the same. The kitchen was exactly how I left it. The hallway was quiet, but something underneath all of it felt different. I stopped outside the guest room and pushed the door open again. The closet was still slightly open from where Sandra had left it. I walked over and closed it, my hand staying on the handle longer than it needed to, trying to understand why that small detail stayed with me. Because it wasn't small, it was a signal. People don't cross lines like that by accident. They do it because they think they can. I turned off the light and stepped back into the hallway. Every moment from earlier replayed differently now. The way Marcus answered too quickly, the way Sandra never asked, the way they spoke before I came downstairs. This didn't start today. I was just late to seeing it. I walked back into the kitchen and looked at the counter where I had placed my keys. Everything looked normal, nothing was out of place, but normal doesn't feel like this. Normal doesn't make you question your position in your own home. I leaned against the counter and exhaled slowly. I didn't feel confused anymore. I felt aware. And awareness changes everything, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And what I saw was clear. They had already made decisions about my house, about my space, about my life, without me. And deep down, I knew this had already gone further than I could see. Chapter 2. The next morning, I started noticing things I should have questioned sooner. It began with the sound of the front door opening while I was upstairs finishing a client revision. I assumed it was Ethan, maybe grabbing something he forgot. Then I heard her voice. "Oh, you are home." I paused, then walked downstairs. Claire stood in the kitchen like nothing about this was unusual. Her purse was already on the counter. Her coat was draped over a chair I usually used. I stopped a few steps away from her. "How did you get in?" She held up a key, casual, almost amused. "Ethan gave it to me." No hesitation, no apology, just fact. I looked at the key for a second, then back at her. "When?" She shrugged. "A few days ago." A few days ago? So this had already been decided before I even knew there was something to question. I nodded once, like I understood, even though I did not. That night, I waited until Ethan sat down before I said anything. "You gave your mother a key?" He did not even look up. "It's just in case she needs access." "In case of what?" He exhaled, annoyed. "Emma, it is not a big deal." "It is to me." He shook his head slightly. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Make something normal into a problem." Normal? That word stayed with me longer than anything else he said, because nothing about this felt normal. Over the next few days, Claire stopped acting like a guest. She did not knock, she did not text, she just came in, each time using that key, each time a little more comfortable. Her shoes started appearing by the door, her voice carried through the house before I even saw her. Small things at first, easy to ignore if I wanted to, but I stopped ignoring them. One afternoon, I walked in and smelled something cooking. Not something I had made, not something I had planned. Claire stood at the stove, stirring a pot. "Thought Ethan might like something warm tonight," she said. I set my bag down. "You did not ask." She smiled slightly. "I didn't think I needed to." That was the moment something settled in my chest. Not confusion, not doubt, clarity. Later that night, I opened the guest room closet again. It was no longer temporary. Clothes lined the rack, spaced out like they had been there for years. Shoes were arranged neatly. A suitcase sat in the corner, unzipped, half empty, like it was waiting to be filled. I reached out and touched one of the hangers. She was not visiting. She was moving in slowly enough that it would look natural. I closed the closet and stood there for a second longer. This was not accidental. A few days later, I came home and stopped in the living room. The pillows were different, the colors softer, quieter, not what I chose. The throw blanket was folded in a way I never folded it. Even the coffee table looked staged differently. Claire walked in behind me. I thought it felt more inviting this way. "You changed my living room." She tilted her head. It needed it. Needed it. I let out a slow breath. This was not about taste. This was about control. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Rachel. Her voice was careful. I hesitated before answering. "What is going on with Claire?" My grip tightened around the phone. "What do you mean?" She paused. "She's been telling people she's moving in, like it's already done." My stomach dropped. "Who did she tell?" "A few people at brunch. She said it like you were fine with it." I leaned against the counter. Rachel lowered her voice. "Emma, she was talking like it was already her house, like you were just living there with them." I didn't respond right away, because something about that hit deeper than everything else. Not the key, not the closet, not the furniture. That. The way she was already rewriting the story. After we hung up, I stood there in silence. The house suddenly felt unfamiliar. I walked into the kitchen and looked around. Every detail felt slightly off. Not enough for someone else to notice, but enough for me to feel it. I opened a drawer and closed it again. Then I said it out loud, even though no one was there to hear it. "This house is mine. It always had been. Every payment, every document, every record was in my name. Nothing about this was shared. Nothing about this had changed, except the way they were acting like it had." That night, I didn't ease into the conversation. "Are you planning for your mother to live here permanently?" Ethan looked at me, already irritated. "Why do you keep pushing this?" "Because she has a key, because she's leaving her things here, because she's telling people she's moving in." He leaned back. "She needs stability, and this house makes sense." This house. Not our home, not my home. This house. Like it was something to be assigned, like I wasn't even part of the equation. I felt the anger then. Not loud, not explosive, just steady. Because this was not confusion, this was not miscommunication, this was a decision that had already been made, without me. I looked at him carefully, at how calm he was, at how certain. He was not asking, he was informing. I nodded once. "Okay." That was all I said, but something inside me had already shifted. I wasn't confused anymore. I was being replaced in my own home, and for the first time, I started wondering what would happen if I stopped being reasonable. Chapter 3. The next morning, I stopped reacting and started paying attention in a different way. Not to what they said, to what they were trying not to show. I began with the house because that was the only thing I knew for certain had not changed, no matter how much they acted like it had. Late in the afternoon, when the house was quiet, I pulled the original closing documents from my office drawer and laid them out across the desk. I went through every page slowly. My name. Only my name. Purchased before the marriage. Separate property. Nothing shared. Nothing unclear. I traced my finger along the signature at the bottom, grounding myself in something real while everything else around me felt like it was shifting without my consent. This house was mine. That had not changed, but the way they were moving inside it made it feel like it had. I closed the folder and sat there for a moment, staring at nothing. Then I opened my laptop. If the house was solid, then everything else needed to be questioned. I logged into our shared accounts first. Everything looked normal. Bills paid, balances stable, no large withdrawals, no obvious red flags. It was clean enough to pass a quick glance. Too clean, because it did not match what I had been seeing in real life. Ethan spent like someone who was not worried about money, but he talked like someone who was. That disconnect had been there for months. I just had not pushed on it before. I leaned closer to the screen, scrolling slower this time, looking for something smaller, something easier to miss. That was when I saw it. A transfer late at night, not large, not dramatic, just enough to disappear inside everything else. I clicked into it. The origin account was not one I recognized. I went back, found another one 2 days earlier, then another. Same pattern, same account. Consistent, intentional. I felt my stomach tighten. This was not random. I opened a new tab and started following the trail, piece by piece. It took time and patience because whoever set this up did not want it to be obvious, but they had not expected someone to look this closely. Eventually, it led somewhere. A separate account, not linked to anything we shared, not visible unless you knew exactly where to dig. I stared at the balance, $43,700. The number itself was not what unsettled me. It was what it meant. This was money he never mentioned, money that could have explained every excuse he had made, every time he said things were tight, every time he avoided a conversation. This was not just hidden, this was intentional. I sat back in the chair, my mind racing through everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The key, the closet, the changes, Claire moving through my house like she already owned it. None of that stood alone anymore. It connected, and it pointed to something I had not wanted to consider before. This was not just about space or convenience. This was preparation. That evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual. I heard the door open while I was still at the desk. I closed the laptop quickly, sliding it aside just as he stepped into the doorway. He did not move right away. He stood there, watching me. "Working late again?" His voice was casual. His eyes were not. "Client revisions," I said, keeping my tone even. He nodded slowly, but he did not leave. He stayed there, just long enough to make it clear he was not just passing by, just long enough to feel like he was checking. I met his gaze for a second. Something in his expression shifted, almost too subtle to catch. Then he smiled slightly and walked away. But the feeling stayed, cold, quiet, uncomfortable. I was not the only one paying attention anymore. Later that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while the house settled into silence. Every small moment replayed differently now, not as separate incidents, as pieces of something larger, something I was only beginning to see. The next morning, I made a decision. I was done guessing. I needed confirmation. I called someone I trusted, Denise Carter. She answered on the third ring. "Emma, it has been a while." "I know. I need your help." There was no hesitation in her response. "Come by this afternoon." I gathered everything carefully. Every document went back exactly where it belonged. Every file closed. Nothing left out. Nothing obvious. By the time I walked out the door, the house looked exactly the same, which is exactly what I needed. Denise's office was downtown, quiet and precise, the kind of place where details mattered. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a look that told me she was already paying attention to more than I had said. We sat across from each other. I slid the documents toward her. She read in silence. No reaction, no interruption, just focus. I watched her, waiting. Finally, she looked up. "How long has this been happening?" I shook my head. "I don't know." She tapped the page in front of her. "This is not random." "What does that mean?" She leaned back slightly. "This is structured." That word settled heavier than anything else. Structured means planning, layers, intent. "This is not one account," she continued. "This is a system. Someone built this over time." I felt my stomach tighten. This was not random. I opened a new tab and started following the trail, piece by piece. It took time and patience because whoever set this up did not want it to be obvious, but they had not expected someone to look this closely. Eventually, it led somewhere. A separate account, not linked to anything we shared, not visible unless you knew exactly where to dig. I stared at the balance, $43,700. The number itself was not what unsettled me, it was what it meant. This was money he never mentioned, money that could have explained every excuse he had made, every time he said things were tight, every time he avoided a conversation. This was not just hidden, this was intentional. I sat back in the chair, my mind racing through everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The key, the closet, the changes, Claire moving through my house like she already owned it. None of that stood alone anymore. It connected, and it pointed to something I had not wanted to consider before. This was not just about space or convenience. This was preparation. That evening, Ethan came home earlier than usual. I heard the door open while I was still at the desk. I closed the laptop quickly, sliding it aside just as he stepped into the doorway. He did not move right away. He stood there, watching me. "Working late again?" His voice was casual. His eyes were not. "Client revisions," I said, keeping my tone even. He nodded slowly, but he did not leave. He stayed there, just long enough to make it clear he was not just passing by, just long enough to feel like he was checking. I met his gaze for a second. Something in his expression shifted, almost too subtle to catch. Then he smiled slightly and walked away. But the feeling stayed, cold, quiet, uncomfortable. I was not the only one paying attention anymore. Later that night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling while the house settled into silence. Every small moment replayed differently now, not as separate incidents, as pieces of something larger, something I was only beginning to see. Chapter 4. I did not rush into it. Once I understood what he had been doing, the urgency faded and something colder took its place. I waited until the timing felt right, until the house was quiet enough for every word to land the way it needed to. Claire was out that afternoon. She had mentioned meeting someone across town. I did not ask who. Ethan was at the kitchen table with his laptop open, relaxed, scrolling like nothing had shifted, like everything was still under his control. I took the chair across from him and sat down without saying anything at first. "We need to talk." He glanced up, mild irritation, nothing more. "About what?" I rested my hands on the table, steady. "I spoke to an attorney." That made him pause. His eyes lifted, sharper now. "About what?" "The house and finances." He closed his laptop halfway, his posture tightening. "Why would you do that?" "Because things stopped adding up." A beat passed. Then I added one more piece. "I also spoke to a forensic accountant." This time, he did not try to hide the shift. He sat back slightly, studying me in a way he had not before. "What exactly are you saying?" I reached into the folder beside me and placed the documents on the table between us. I did not push them toward him. I let him decide whether he wanted to look. $43,700, I said. Separate account, repeated transfers over time. His jaw tightened. "You went through my accounts." "I followed patterns. That is private." I held his gaze. "So is my house." The silence that followed felt different. He did not answer right away. For the first time, he did not have an immediate response. I placed another document on the table, closer to him this time, the original property record. Purchased before we were married, sole ownership, fully protected. His eyes moved across the page, slower now. "You planned this," he said. "No." I leaned forward slightly. "You did. You did not just lie. You planned this while standing in my house." That landed harder than anything else. He shifted in his chair, the confidence he walked in with starting to thin. "She needed a place," he said, "and this house made sense." I cut him off before he could finish. "This house is not yours to assign." The words stayed in the air between us. He looked at me differently then, like he was recalculating something. "This is what happens next," I said. He did not interrupt. "You provide full financial disclosure, every account, every transfer." I tapped the papers lightly. "You return $12,400 that was redirected, with interest." His eyes flickered. "You remove your mother's access to this property." Another pause. "And if I do not?" He asked it quietly, but there was something under it now. Uncertainty. "It becomes legal." I let that sit for a second, then added, calm and clear, "If this goes to court, everything becomes public. Every account, every transfer, every message. Court records do not stay private." That was when I saw it. Not panic, not yet, but the beginning of something closer to fear. He leaned back slowly, looking at me like he was trying to figure out when the balance had shifted. "You would really do that?" I did not raise my voice. "You already made it necessary." The room felt tighter after that, smaller. He looked down at the documents again, this time longer. When he spoke, his voice was lower. "You went further than I thought you would." I did not answer, because he was right. Within days, everything started moving, quietly, but with direction. I brought Rachel Lynn in fully and handed over everything I had. She reviewed the documents with the kind of focus that made it clear she already saw where this was going. "This is clean on your side," she said. "Very clean." "And him?" She did not hesitate. "He has exposure." Denise expanded the financial review, pulling apart the structure piece by piece. It was not just one account. It was layered. 2 sets of records, underreported income, transfers routed carefully enough to avoid attention. Each detail built on the last until there was no space left for denial. One afternoon, Denise called me directly. "I found something else." I sat up straighter. "What?" "There are messages tied to the transfers." My grip tightened slightly. "What kind of messages?" She did not soften it. "He discussed transferring partial control of the house to family." The word family settled heavily. Not me. Not us. Family. Claire. It was not legally binding. Not yet. But it showed intent. Clear, deliberate. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that settle with everything else. When I opened them again, there was no confusion left. This had never been temporary. This had never been about helping someone. This was positioning, a slow shift of control that was supposed to go unnoticed until it was too late to stop. But it was not too late. Not anymore. That night, I walked through the house slowly. The same walls, the same rooms, the same space I built long before any of this existed. But it didn't feel uncertain anymore. It felt defined, because now I knew exactly what I was dealing with, and more importantly, I knew exactly where I stood. I stopped outside the guest room and looked at the closed door. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was reacting. I felt ahead of it, because suspicion had turned into proof, and proof changes everything. I turned off the light and walked back toward my room, and for the first time, I was not thinking about what he had done. I was thinking about how I was going to end it. Chapter 5. I moved forward without waiting for anything else to break. By that point, there was nothing left to guess, nothing left to question. I knew exactly where everything stood, and more importantly, where I stood in it. The legal process did not turn into a long fight. When the numbers are clear and the pattern is undeniable, things move faster than people expect. Ethan still tried, in his way, to keep some control. We met again, this time in a quiet office with a long table between us. No raised voices, no tension you could point to, just something heavier sitting in the air. He looked at me like he was trying to find a version of me that would soften. "This does not have to go further," he said. I looked at him for a moment before answering. "It already has." He held my gaze, then looked down just for a second. That was all it took. That small break told me everything I needed to know. For the first time, he understood he was not getting out of this the way he planned. He agreed to everything after that. Full disclosure. Every account, every transfer, every record he thought would never be seen. My attorney laid it out cleanly. No emotion, just facts lined up in a way that made the truth impossible to avoid. $12,400 returned with interest calculated down to the last dollar. Not negotiated, not debated, required. The separation followed without resistance. On paper, it was simple. Clean lines, clear terms, nothing left open. The house remained mine. It always had been. Now it was protected in a way no one could quietly touch again. But the real consequences did not happen in that room. They came after. A few days later, my phone rang while I was in the kitchen. I almost did not answer, but I did. It was him. He did not start the way he used to. No calm tone, no controlled voice. Something was off immediately. "They're asking questions," he said. "I need to know what you told them." I leaned against the counter, looking out the window. "I did not tell anyone anything," I said. "You already did." There was silence on the other end. Then a quiet, almost sharp breath. "You do not understand how this works." I almost smiled at that. "No," I said. "I think I do now." He started to say something else, but stopped halfway through. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of him breathing. And in that silence, I could hear it. Not anger, not control, fear. That was the moment. Not the paperwork, not the repayment, not the agreement. That was when I knew it was over in a way he could not fix. I ended the call without another word. After that, things unfolded exactly the way they always do when the truth has already been exposed. An audit was triggered, not because I pushed it, but because the pattern was already there. Clients started to hesitate. One contract paused, then another. Questions came in, ones that needed clear answers he could not give anymore. Within months, the business he relied on began to fracture. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough at first to make him scramble, then enough that it could not be contained. I heard through someone else that his license had been suspended pending investigation. I did not follow up. I did not need to. He thought he was taking something from me. All he did was expose himself. I did not lose anything. I just saw clearly who he really was. Claire left not long after everything settled. No argument, no apology. She packed her things, walked out, and did not look back. I watched the door close behind her and felt something shift. Not relief exactly, more like clarity. A few days later, I walked into the guest room. For a second, I stood there, remembering how easily she had stepped into that space like it was already hers. It felt smaller now, quieter. I opened the windows and let the air move through. Then I started changing things. New paint, new light. Anything that did not belong to me was gone. Not because I needed to erase it, because I was done carrying it. When I finished, the room felt steady again, like the rest of the house, like me. Later that week, I drove out to see my mother. We sat outside, the air still, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask anything from you. "I used to think you were overly cautious," I said. She smiled, the same way she always does when she already knows where a conversation is going. "I wasn't cautious, I was prepared," she said. I nodded slowly. That made more sense now. Preparation is not expecting something bad. It's about knowing exactly where your boundaries are before someone tries to cross them. It's about understanding what you've built and making sure no one else gets to redefine it for you. I stayed for a while, then drove home as the light started to fade. The house was quiet when I walked in.
Not empty, just settled. I walked through each room without thinking about what had happened there before, only about what it was now. When I reached the kitchen, I paused for a moment, my hand resting on the counter where everything first started to feel wrong. That version of me felt far away. Not gone, just clearer, stronger. I turned off the lights and stood there in the quiet for a second. If something feels off, even in the smallest way, pay attention, because it usually is. And if you've ever found yourself questioning your own instincts just to keep the peace, you're not alone. But there comes a point where staying quiet costs more than speaking up. So I'm curious, would you have confronted him the moment things felt wrong, or waited until you had everything in your hands before making a move? Because that choice changes everything. If this story meant something to you, stay with me, share your thoughts below, and follow along for more stories that might feel a little closer to your own.